On a frigid July dawn in 1944, Lieutenant Madeley of the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm found himself in an unprecedentedly perilous predicament. His F4U Corsair, designated JT404, had succumbed to mechanical failure while flying over the Norwegian coast. Beneath him lay occupied territory, Germany's dominion over Norway, where capture invariably meant brutal interrogation and incarceration. With his engine sputtering erratically and his altitude plummeting with alarming speed, Madeley had no alternative but to attempt a desperate emergency landing in a field near the town of Bodo. What transpired next would grant German aviation specialists their inaugural intimate examination of one of America's most formidable aerial adversaries. And what they would uncover would evoke both profound admiration and deep apprehension. The distinctive bent-winged aircraft that crash-landed in that Norwegian expanse represented the pinnacle of American engineering ambition and industrial prowess. As German technicians commenced their examination of the captured Corsair, they were scrutinizing an airframe that had already begun to irrevocably alter the equilibrium of power in the Pacific theater. But how had this transformation occurred? How had the Americans engineered a fighter so cutting-edge that it could outpace and overpower Germany's finest aerial combatants? And what did this portend for the pilots of the Luftwaffe, who might eventually confront these formidable machines in the unforgiving skies of war? To fully comprehend the shockwaves that rippled through the German aviation community upon their analysis of the F4U Corsair, we must first journey back to 1938. It was then that the United States Navy articulated one of the most ambitious fighter aircraft specifications in the annals of aviation history. The Navy sought a carrier-based fighter capable of exceeding 400 miles per hour, a velocity that seemed virtually unattainable for a naval aircraft of that era. Most contemporary carrier fighters struggled to achieve speeds of 350 miles per hour. Furthermore, the inherent complexities of naval operations, including the necessity for robust landing gear, arresting hooks, and folding wings, typically introduced additional weight and aerodynamic drag, further compromising performance. This monumental challenge was entrusted to the Chance Vought Corporation and their exceptionally talented chief designer, Rex Beisel. Beisel and his team recognized that conventional design methodologies would fall woefully short of meeting the Navy's ambitious speed target. They understood that innovation was paramount. They needed to redefine the boundaries of aerodynamic design and engine technology. Their groundbreaking solution would ultimately evolve into one of the most iconic fighter aircraft designs in aviation history, the inverted gull-wing configuration that bestowed upon the Corsair its instantly recognizable silhouette. This unconventional wing arrangement was not an aesthetic choice. It was born of pure engineering necessity. The Navy had mandated that their new fighter be powered by the most potent and largest engine available, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp. This colossal 18-cylinder radial engine generated a staggering 2,000 horsepower. To effectively harness this immense power, the aircraft required an enormous propeller, measuring 13 feet and 4 inches in diameter. Such a substantial propeller presented a critical engineering hurdle: how to achieve adequate ground clearance without resorting to impossibly long and heavy landing gear struts. Beisel's team discovered their ingenious solution in the inverted gull wing. By angling the wing downward from the fuselage before sweeping it upward again toward the wingtips, they could position the landing gear at the wing's lowest point. This provided the essential clearance for the massive propeller, while allowing for relatively short landing gear legs. This design also conferred aerodynamic advantages, enabling the wing to meet the fuselage at a perfect 90-degree angle, thereby minimizing drag at the crucial wing-fuselage juncture. When the prototype XF4U-1 made its inaugural flight on May 29, 1940, it unequivocally demonstrated the efficacy of Beisel's radical concept. Test pilot Lyman Bullard propelled the aircraft to a breathtaking 404 miles per hour during that maiden voyage, marking it as the first American fighter to surpass 400 miles per hour in level flight. This was an astonishing accomplishment. At a time when Germany's Messerschmitt Bf-109 and Britain's Supermarine Spitfire were laboring to reach speeds of 360 miles per hour, the Americans had engineered a fighter that was more than 40 miles per hour faster. However, speed was but a single facet of the Corsairs' revolutionary design. The aircraft incorporated a multitude of aerodynamic innovations that were years ahead of their time. The landing gear retracted completely into flush, enclosed wheel wells, leaving the wing surfaces unimpeded and perfectly smooth, a feature that would not become commonplace on fighter aircraft for many years to come. The oil coolers were seamlessly integrated into the wing's leading edge, employing meticulously engineered air intakes that minimized drag while ensuring optimal cooling. The Corsairs' armament was equally formidable. Whereas most fighters of that era carried a mixed array of machine guns and cannons or relied on smaller caliber weaponry, the F4U was equipped with 650 caliber Browning machine guns mounted in its wings. Each gun was supplied with 400 rounds of ammunition, providing pilots with substantial firepower for prolonged engagements. The concentrated firepower of these 6 heavy machine guns possessed the capability to dismantle most enemy aircraft with a brief burst, and the high velocity of the 50 caliber rounds rendered them effective at greater ranges than their smaller counterparts. Nevertheless, despite its immense promise, the Corsairs' early service was marred by tragedy and profound frustration. The very long nose that housed the potent R-2800 engine created severe visibility limitations for pilots attempting carrier landings. The cockpit was positioned so far aft that pilots could barely discern anything over the nose during the critical final approach phase of landing. This deficiency led to a series of perilous carrier trials in late 1942, during which test pilots struggled immensely to land the aircraft safely aboard ship. The situation escalated to such a critical point that the Navy temporarily suspended efforts to operate Corsairs from aircraft carriers. The fighter that had been meticulously designed for naval operations was deemed too hazardous for carrier deployment. Consequently, the Navy assigned the Corsair to the Marine Corps for land-based operations, while adopting the more docile Grumman F-6F Hellcat as its primary carrier fighter. This decision would prove to be remarkably fortunate for the Marines, who were desperately in need of a high-performance fighter for their operations in the Pacific. Marine Corps fighter squadrons had been utilizing outdated Grumman F-4F Wildcats, aircraft that were outmatched by newer Japanese fighters and incapable of intercepting high-altitude Japanese bombers. The introduction of the Corsair into Marine squadrons would fundamentally transform the air war in the Pacific. The 1st Marine Corps Air Squadron, VMF 124, arrived at Henderson Field on Guadalcanal in February 1943. The Cactus Air Force, as the fighter squadrons based at Henderson Field were known, had been engaged in a constant struggle to maintain air superiority over the Solomon Islands. Japanese bombers routinely assailed Allied positions, and the existing Allied fighters frequently lacked the performance necessary to intercept them at their operating altitudes. The Corsairs' combat debut on February 14, 1943, was unremarkable. During a mission escorting B-24 Liberator bombers, the mixed formation of Army P-38 Lightnings, P-40 Warhawks, Navy bombers, and Marine Corsairs was ambushed by Japanese fighters. 8 American aircraft were lost, including 2 Corsairs. 1 F4U was destroyed in a mid-air collision with a Japanese Zero. This was hardly the dominant performance that had been anticipated from the new superfighter. However, the Marine pilots rapidly learned to leverage the Corsair's advantages while assiduously avoiding its inherent weaknesses. The key strategy was to eschew turning engagements with Japanese fighters, which possessed superior maneuverability at lower speeds, and instead, to utilize the F4U's superior speed and climb rate to dictate the terms of engagement. Corsair pilots devised tactics centered on high-speed passes, exploiting their speed advantage to attack and then disengage before the enemy could effectively retaliate. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 became the first pilot to fully demonstrate the Corsair's latent potential. An experienced aviator who had been flying Marine aircraft since 1938, Walsh possessed an acute understanding of how to exploit the F4U's performance capabilities. On May 13, 1943, Walsh shot down 3 Japanese aircraft in a single sortie, achieving the distinction of becoming the first Corsair ace and definitively proving that the bent-wing fighter could dominate the skies when piloted with skill and precision. News of the Corsairs' formidable capabilities spread rapidly through both Allied and Japanese ranks. Japanese pilots, who had become accustomed to their advantage in maneuverability, now found themselves confronting an adversary that could simply outrun them. The F4U could accelerate away from perilous situations, ascend above attacking fighters, and dive at speeds that Japanese aircraft simply could not match. For the first time in the Pacific War, Japanese pilots found themselves at a consistent disadvantage in fighter-to-fighter engagements. The psychological impact on the Japanese pilots was profound. They began to develop a deep-seated fear of the distinctive acoustic signature produced by the Corsairs' engine and propeller combination, which generated a characteristic whistling sound during high-speed dives. Japanese forces bestowed upon the F4U the chilling moniker, Whistling Death, a testament to both its auditory signature and its devastating effectiveness in combat. As 1943 progressed, an increasing number of Marine squadrons transitioned to the Corsair, and the aircraft's combat record continued its upward trajectory. By the end of the year, Corsair pilots had achieved an astonishing 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, a level of air superiority that was virtually unprecedented in the history of aerial combat. The fighter that had been deemed unsuitable for carrier operations by the Navy was proving itself to be one of the most exceptionally effective air superiority fighters of the entire war. However, the Corsairs' impact extended far beyond mere air-to-air engagements. The aircraft's robust construction and exceptionally powerful engine rendered it an outstanding fighter bomber, capable of carrying substantial bomb loads while retaining its formidable air-to-air combat capabilities. Marine squadrons began deploying the Corsair for close air support missions, attacking Japanese ground installations with bombs and rockets, while simultaneously maintaining the ability to defend themselves against enemy fighters. The F4U's inherent versatility emerged as one of its most significant strengths. Unlike specialized interceptors or ground attack aircraft, the Corsair could perform multiple roles with equal proficiency. It could escort bombers on extended missions, conduct fighter sweeps to achieve air superiority, assault ground targets with bombs and rockets, and even execute reconnaissance missions. This remarkable flexibility made it an invaluable asset for Marine commanders, who often operated with constrained resources and required aircraft that could adapt seamlessly to evolving tactical circumstances. Concurrently, across the Atlantic, German aviation specialists were closely monitoring the advancements of Allied aircraft with intense interest. Intelligence reports emanating from the Pacific described a new American fighter possessing extraordinary performance characteristics, but the full extent of the F4U's capabilities remained largely obscured to German analysts. They had encountered captured American aircraft previously. P-51 Mustangs, P-47 Thunderbolts, and P-38 Lightnings had all undergone examination at German testing facilities. However, the Corsair, operating primarily within the Pacific theater, remained an enigma. German pilots flying the Luftwaffe's premier fighters, the Messerschmitt B F109 and the Focke-Wulf SFW190, had cultivated a considerable degree of confidence in their aircraft's capabilities through years of combat over Europe. The BF109, in its latest iterations, could achieve speeds approaching 400 miles per hour and exhibited excellent climb performance and maneuverability. The FW190 was widely regarded as the finest all-around fighter in the world, masterfully blending speed, firepower, and ruggedness into a package that had dominated Allied fighters since its initial appearance in 1941. Yet, intelligence reports from the Pacific suggested that the Americans had developed something truly exceptional. Descriptions of the Corsair's performance seemed almost too extraordinary to be credible. Speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour, climb rates that surpassed most German fighters, an armament capable of obliterating enemy aircraft with brief salvos. German aviation experts remained skeptical, questioning whether these reports were embellished or if the Japanese opponents were simply outmatched by the seasoned Luftwaffe pilots defending the Reich. The capture of Lieutenant Mateli's Corsair in July 1944 would provide German experts with their inaugural opportunity to meticulously examine the F4U and definitively ascertain the veracity of the reports concerning its capabilities. The aircraft was transported by ship to Narvik, subsequently dispatched to Germany for in-depth analysis at Air Proving Ground Stella Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's principal aircraft testing facility. At Rechlin, German engineers and test pilots had systematically examined captured Allied aircraft throughout the war. They had subjected American P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, British Spitfires and Hurricanes, and Soviet fighters captured on the Eastern Front to rigorous testing. Each evaluation yielded invaluable intelligence regarding Allied capabilities and assisted German designers in refining their own aircraft. However, the examination of the captured Corsair would reveal performance attributes that astonished even seasoned German aviation professionals. The initial intimation of the Corsair's advanced design became apparent during the preliminary inspection. German technicians were deeply impressed by the aircraft's sophisticated construction, characterized by its all-metal airframe, cutting-edge aerodynamics, and exceptionally powerful engine. The R2800 Double Wasp was significantly larger and more potent than any engine employed in German fighters, producing nearly 50% more power than the engines powering contemporary B, F109S, and FW190S. When German test pilots finally had the opportunity to fly the captured Corsair, their reactions constituted a complex mixture of profound admiration and significant concern. The aircraft's performance exceeded their most optimistic expectations across virtually every conceivable metric. It proved faster than any German fighter in level flight, could achieve climb rates that matched or surpassed their top interceptors, and possessed a structural integrity that enabled it to withstand G-forces that would have compromised other aircraft. Perhaps the most unsettling realization for the German pilots was the understanding that the Corsair represented a new paradigm in American military technology. Unlike earlier American fighters, which frequently exhibited signs of design compromises or shortcuts in manufacturing, the F4U demonstrated a level of engineering sophistication and industrial capability that strongly suggested the United States had fully mobilized its technological resources for wartime production. The implications of this realization were sobering. If the Americans were capable of producing fighters of this caliber in substantial quantities, it would fundamentally and irrevocably alter the balance of air power. German pilots, who had grown accustomed to engaging Allied aircraft on relatively equal footing, would find themselves facing adversaries possessing decisive performance advantages. The air war over Europe, which had already begun to tilt in favor of the Allies, might become even more daunting for the Luftwaffe. However, this dawning realization would arrive too late to exert any significant influence on German fighter development. By mid-1944, Germany's aviation industry was grappling with severe material shortages, the destructive impact of bombing raids on its factories, and the diversion of critical resources toward the development of jet aircraft. The opportunity to design and deploy new piston-engined fighters that could rival the Corsair's performance had, for all practical purposes, already passed. As the captured Corsair underwent its rigorous testing at Rechlin, the air war continued its relentless evolution, shaping the destiny of nations. In the Pacific, Corsair squadrons provided crucial support for the American island-hopping campaign, offering vital air cover for amphibious landings and launching devastating attacks against Japanese positions throughout the Central Pacific. Each mission underscored the aircraft's remarkable versatility and effectiveness, building a combat record that would indelibly establish the F4U as one of the premier fighters of the Second World War. The narrative of how American engineers conceived and produced a fighter capable of surpassing Germany's finest aircraft transcends mere technical achievement. It symbolizes the profound transformation of American industrial capacity, the unwavering dedication of engineers and laborers who forged revolutionary technology under the immense pressures of wartime, and the exceptional courage of the pilots who bravely piloted these advanced machines into combat against seasoned adversaries. However, the full extent of the Corsair's capabilities would not be completely comprehended until later in the war, when upgraded versions of the aircraft would exhibit even more pronounced performance advantages over their adversaries. The F4U that crash-landed in Norway represented merely the vanguard of a technological revolution that would redefine aerial warfare and leave German pilots grappling to understand how the Americans had achieved such a dramatic leap forward in fighter design and performance. The captured Corsair at Rechlin embodied more than just an exceptionally advanced fighter aircraft. It served as irrefutable evidence of America's ascendance as the world's preeminent aerospace power, and a prescient glimpse into the technological dominance that would characterize the post-war era. In the summer of 1944, as Lieutenant Madeli's captured Corsair was being conveyed to Aeroprobungsgruppe 134 Rechlin, German test pilots and engineers prepared for what they anticipated would be a routine evaluation of yet another Allied fighter. They had, after all, examined numerous captured aircraft previously: American Mustangs, Thunderbolts and Lightnings, British Spitfires, and Hurricanes. Each assessment followed a predictable pattern: detailed inspection, flight testing, performance comparisons with contemporary German fighters, and the formulation of tactical countermeasure recommendations. However, the F4U Corsair would shatter their preconceived notions and compel them to confront an unsettling truth about the rapidly evolving landscape of aerial combat. The initial shock materialized during the preliminary ground inspection. German engineers were accustomed to scrutinizing Allied aircraft and identifying design compromises, weight penalties imposed by naval requirements, or performance sacrifices made to facilitate production. The Corsair displayed none of these familiar shortcomings. Instead, they encountered an aircraft that appeared to signify a new echelon of engineering sophistication. The immense Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine immediately captured their attention. Generating 2,000 horsepower, it produced nearly 50% more power than the engines propelling Germany's frontline fighters. The BMW 801 radial engine powering the Focke-Wulf 190 generated approximately 1,700 horsepower, while the Daimler-Benz B605 within the Messerschmitt Bf 109 delivered approximately 1,450 horsepower. The Americans had not merely constructed a larger engine, they had engineered a power plant that represented a generational leap in technological advancement. German technicians marveled at the engine's sophisticated internal systems. The R2800 incorporated advanced metallurgy, precision manufacturing techniques, and a level of reliability that surpassed anything in German production at the time. More disconcerting was the realization that this was not an experimental or prototype engine, but a production power plant being manufactured in substantial quantities for operational aircraft. The industrial capacity required to mass-produce such advanced engines indicated that American wartime production had reached levels that German planners had not fully anticipated. The airframe itself revealed equally sophisticated engineering. The inverted gull-wing configuration was not merely an aesthetic choice, but an ingenious solution to multiple engineering challenges. German designers recognized the inherent elegance of the design. It provided crucial ground clearance for the colossal propeller, while simultaneously maintaining optimal aerodynamics at the critical wing fuselage juncture. The fully retractable landing gear, with its innovative 90-degree rotation during retraction, was years ahead of contemporary German fighter designs. Every detail of the Corsair's construction reflected America's formidable industrial might. The aircraft's aluminum structure was fabricated to tolerances that German factories, grappling with material shortages and the impact of bombing raids, could no longer consistently achieve. The hydraulic systems, electrical components, and even the cockpit instrumentation exhibited a level of sophistication that rendered German fighters seemingly rudimentary by comparison. When German test pilots subsequently took the captured Corsair aloft, their reactions transcended mere professional admiration, evolving into genuine astonishment. Hannes Friedrich Wolf, one of Rechlin's most experienced test pilots, later recounted his initial flight in the F4U as a transformative experience. The aerial prowess of the American aircraft, in every phase of flight, demonstrably outshone that of contemporary German adversaries, frequently by considerable margins. In level flight, the Corsair exhibited speeds unattainable by any German fighter. While the most advanced iterations of the Bf 109 could attain speeds nearing 400 miles per hour, and the FW 190 could achieve comparable velocities at optimal altitudes, the F4U consistently maintained over 440 miles per hour across a broad spectrum of altitudes. Crucially, it retained these impressive speeds even when laden with external fuel tanks or weaponry, a capability that severely compromised the performance of German fighters. Its rate of climb was equally remarkable. German aviators had become accustomed to the exceptional initial climb rates of their aircraft, particularly the Bf-109, which could ascend rapidly from takeoff. However, the Corsairs' sustained climb performance, propelled by its potent engine, enabled it to reach operational altitude faster than any German counterpart and sustained superior performance throughout its ascent. Perhaps most unsettling for German pilots was the Corsairs' agility in aerial combat. Although German aircraft like the FW190 were lauded for their high-speed handling and rapid roll rates, the F4U matched or surpassed these attributes while also demonstrating superior performance in vertical maneuvers. This American fighter could ascend and descend at rates that afforded it control over the timing and configuration of air engagements. Major Hans Kolbo, another test pilot at Rechlin, directed his assessment toward the Corsairs' combat effectiveness against German aircraft. His findings were stark. In simulated combat scenarios, the F-4U's performance advantages were so pronounced that German pilots would be compelled to adopt defensive postures, irrespective of their proficiency. The American aircraft could initiate or break off engagements at will, attack from advantageous positions, and extricate itself from unfavorable circumstances with greater alacrity than German pilots could react. The disparity in armament was equally concerning. The Corsairs' 650 caliber machine guns, though lacking the explosive rounds of German cannon, delivered a volume of fire capable of destroying most aircraft with a brief burst. More significantly, the high velocity and flat trajectory of the 50 caliber projectiles made them effective at greater ranges than the mixed armament typically found on German fighters. American pilots could commence firing earlier and sustain effective fire at distances where German pilots would struggle to achieve accuracy. German engineers also investigated the Corsairs' potential for diverse combat roles. They ascertained that the aircraft's robust construction and powerful engine conferred exceptional versatility. Unlike German fighters, which were frequently optimized for specific functions, such as the Bf-109 as an interceptor or the FW-190 as a fighter bomber, the F-4U could execute multiple missions with equal proficiency. It could serve as a dedicated fighter, a bomber escort, a ground attack platform, or even a reconnaissance asset without substantial degradation in performance. This adaptability had profound strategic implications. German commanders were accustomed to confronting Allied formations where distinct aircraft types fulfilled specialized duties. For instance, P-51 Mustangs for escort and P-47 Thunderbolts for ground assault. The Corsairs' capacity to transition between roles mid-mission meant that German defenders would face unpredictable threats capable of adapting to evolving tactical circumstances. The evaluation team at Rechlin also conducted comprehensive comparisons between the captured F-4U and captured examples of other Allied fighters. These trials revealed that the Corsair represented a substantial leap forward from earlier American designs. While aircraft such as the P-47 Thunderbolt possessed speed and formidable armament, they lacked the maneuverability and climb performance that rendered the F-4U so formidable. The P-51 Mustang, which had already proven a vexing opponent for German fighters, exhibited superior maneuverability to the Corsair, but did not match its speed and firepower advantages. Perhaps most alarming was the realization that the captured Corsair was not even the most recent variant in American service. Intelligence indicated that newer versions equipped with even more potent engines were already in production. The F4U-4, powered by an enhanced R2-800 engine producing 2,450 horsepower, promised performance that would surpass even the captured aircraft's already impressive capabilities. German test pilots also noted the Corsair's user-friendly operational characteristics. Unlike German fighters, which often demanded significant pilot skill for safe handling, the F-4U was relatively forgiving and straightforward to pilot. This implied that American training programs could produce competent Corsair pilots more rapidly than German programs could train pilots for their more demanding aircraft. In a conflict increasingly characterized by attrition, the ability to quickly train effective pilots became as crucial as aircraft performance itself. The psychological impact of these revelations on German aviation personnel was considerable. Many had harbored the conviction that German engineering superiority would ultimately yield fighters capable of matching or exceeding Allied designs. The Corsair evaluation compelled them to confront the reality that American aircraft had not only closed the technological gap with Germany, but had surpassed it in numerous critical domains. This technological disparity was exacerbated by production realities. Even if German designers could conceive of fighters to rival the Corsairs' performance, the industrial capacity to manufacture them in sufficient quantities no longer existed. American factories were producing thousands of advanced fighters monthly, while German production languished due to material shortages, aerial bombardment damage, and the disarray of a collapsing wartime economy. The Rechlin evaluation also illuminated the sophistication of American manufacturing techniques. The Corsair's construction quality, assembly precision, and overall reliability reflected industrial processes that German factories could no longer emulate. American workers, operating in secure, well-equipped facilities with abundant materials, were producing aircraft to standards that war-ravaged German industry could not achieve. Meanwhile, in the Pacific theater, Corsair squadrons were demonstrating the aircraft's efficacy in increasingly challenging combat environments. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944 highlighted the F4U's effectiveness in large-scale naval operations. Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons, now operating from both land bases and aircraft carriers, contributed significantly to achieving decisive air superiority over Japanese forces. The Royal Navy's experience with the Corsair in European waters provided further corroboration of the aircraft's capabilities. British pilots operating F4Us from carriers in the North Atlantic and North Sea found the American fighter to be superior to their own aircraft in most performance metrics. Although British Corsairs did not engage German fighters in combat, their operational deployment in the demanding North Atlantic setting underscored the aircraft's dependability and adaptability. German intelligence services attempted to gather more data on Corsair operations and performance, but the stringent security surrounding Allied aircraft development rendered comprehensive intelligence acquisition difficult. The limited information they did obtain painted an increasingly disquieting picture of American aviation technology advancing at an unprecedented pace. The advent of jet aircraft offered a glimmer of hope for German aviation. The Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter promised capabilities that could challenge the Corsair. However, jet technology was still in its nascent stages, hampered by reliability issues and material shortages that constrained operational effectiveness. The few Me-262s that entered combat operations showcased the potential of jet propulsion, but also exposed the difficulties of fielding revolutionary technology under wartime conditions. For German piston engine fighter development, the Corsair evaluation marked a pivotal moment. It became evident that conventional approaches to fighter design could not compete with American advancements. The Focke-Wulf Ta 152, Germany's most sophisticated piston engine fighter, represented the zenith of German engineering, but still fell short of matching the Corsair's overall performance envelope. The captured F4U also revealed the extent of American material advantages. The aircraft's construction incorporated strategic materials, high-grade aluminum alloys, specialized steels, and advanced rubber compounds that were in critically short supply in Germany. Even if German engineers could design superior aircraft, the necessary materials were simply not available in the quantities required for meaningful production. As 1944 transitioned into 1945, the performance disparity between German and American fighters continued to widen. Newer Corsair variants exhibited even greater capabilities, while German fighter production declined and pilot training standards deteriorated due to fuel shortages and the pressure of defending German airspace against overwhelming Allied aerial assaults. The narrative of the captured Corsair at Rechlin became symbolic of the shifting technological and industrial balance during World War II. German pilots who had once enjoyed an advantage over their adversaries found themselves confronting aircraft that surpassed their capabilities in virtually every performance category. The psychological impact of this technological inferiority contributed to declining morale among Luftwaffe personnel, who recognized that their individual skill and courage could no longer compensate for inferior equipment. The F4U Corsair represented more than just an advanced fighter aircraft. It embodied American industrial and technological prowess at its wartime peak. The engineering teams that conceived the Corsair, the workers who manufactured it, and the pilots who flew it into battle had achieved something that seemed improbable just a few years prior: air superiority through technological dominance. For German pilots who encountered reports of Corsair performance or studied the intelligence derived from the captured aircraft, the implications were undeniable. The aerial conflict had fundamentally transformed, and the technological advantages that had once favored German aviation had decisively shifted to the Allies. The era of American air power had dawned, with aircraft like the F4U Corsair heralding its arrival. Ultimately, the German assessment of the captured Corsair validated what Allied pilots had been experiencing in combat. The F4U represented a new generation of fighter aircraft that combined speed, firepower, and versatility in ways that previous designs had never achieved. The astonished reactions of German pilots and engineers at Rechlin reflected not merely professional admiration for superior technology, but a recognition that the balance of aerial power had permanently and decisively shifted against the Luftwaffe. The bent-wing fighter that had crashed in a Norwegian field had unveiled the future of aerial warfare, a future in which American technological and industrial supremacy would reshape the global balance of power and establish the foundation for decades of aerospace dominance.